if you don't see my gender, you don't understand why I'm afraid to use public bathrooms. You don't understand why it's so important to me that especially the people who call me family get my pronouns right. And why when they don't, it causes extreme sense of dis-ease, dysphoria, um, and emotional pain. Um, and so when we ask you to see who we are, we're not asking you to ignore your beliefs somehow. We're asking you to expand them to see who we are as human and worth seeing. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Casey Ambermer. I use they, them pronouns. Today, we're going to discuss blind-isms as we move full force into Pride Month, aka June of 2026. So the questions we're asking are, can you see my gender, my orientation, my race, my class? Can I see yours? Why we're also discussing why allyship means seeing, not choosing to ignore identities. Introduce yourself, my friend.
My name is Bob Erie, and I use he, him pronouns, and I am a pastor in Pennsylvania and very privileged to be the co-host of this podcast with the amazing Dr. Diz.
As I said, my name is Dr. Casey Ambermer, aka Dr. Diz. So our starting point today, it comes with many a story, but the academic background is the idea of colorblind racism. So I don't see color, I just see the human. It was a term coined in 2003 by Eduardo Bonilla-Silva. And basically, it says if you don't see race, you're ignoring the systemic structures that make race as a made up category have very real implications. So last week we discussed social constructs. This week we're going to discuss a bit more about how those social constructions play a role in causing harm, but also why some of us experience great pride in who we are and the identities we claim. I know I've been on the receiving end of blind-isms. I don't see gender. I just see Casey Ann. And I've been on the performing end of things like colorblind racism because I was raised to, quote, not see race in many ways. And until I knew better, late high school, early college, that was my story and I was sticking to it. Bob, do you kind of have an overview of your experience with this idea of blind-isms?
Yeah, I mean, very similar to yours. I've not typically been on the receiving end of it, which, if, a cishet white dude, hello privilege. But like, I grew up in an environment and particularly in a household where like race came up a lot. Not from my dad, but from my mom and my maternal grandparents. Like race was always something that was mentioned. And so as I started to like learn better, part of, I thought, doing better was to not see race until thankfully I had people who pointed out to me, if you don't see my race, you don't see my experience, and you don't see a big part of what it is to be me. The antidote to racism is not to say you don't see race, because race still matters in huge ways. The antidote to racism is to ensure that you're not using it as a platform for bias.
Yeah, yeah. And so our kind of response here, the reason why we are doing this topic today is because it's Pride Month. Yeah.
Happy Pride.
And check out the bonus video for Pride Month. But I was very recently told, I don't see you as non binary. I just see you. Okay. Maybe that's why you don't get my pronouns right. Um, and this is something that I do deal with every Pride season. But it's more than that. And the reason why we bring this up and why I want you to see who I am and the identities I claim is because it's important for how you relate to me. I may or may not have mentioned last week, I really can't remember, the idea that if you don't see my gender, you don't understand why I'm afraid to use public bathrooms. You don't understand why it's so important to me that especially the people who call me family get my pronouns right. And why when they don't, it causes extreme sense of dis-ease, dysphoria, um, and emotional pain. Um, and so when we ask you to see who we are, we're not asking you to ignore your beliefs somehow. We're asking you to expand them to see who we are as human and worth seeing. Um, do you have anything to add before I go on to the next slide?
Well, I have something, but it'll come with the next slide, I think. So
Um, so there's this idea that not seeing an identity might mean you're assuming a cis normative or heteronormative or an abled or a white, an otherwise normative or privileged identity unless proven otherwise. It's asking things like, do you ask people if they have a spouse or do you ask them if they have a husband or a wife, depending on what their gender is? Do you assume that women over, say, 25 have kids or should want kids or should be married or looking to be married? Do you assume anyone over 25 is looking to be married and that the reason they're not is just because they haven't found the person yet, not because they're not looking? Do you see someone parked in disabled parking, getting out of a car without a mobility aid, and assume they don't actually need the disabled parking? If you're saying you don't see gender, you don't see orientation, you don't see ability, you don't see insert here, is what you're saying that you're assuming everyone is whatever the dominant or normative identity is until proven otherwise.
exactly.
Jump in, my friend.
I was also going to add that when we say things like, I don't see such and such, what we're really saying often is, I don't want to see such and such if it's not whatever the normative in my mind is. So, as a prime example, uh, last week I had a member of my parish who was very upset about the pride flags that were out in front of the church that we put them out in response to an anti-gay hate crime that happened, and we decided the council voted to, and didn't even vote, it was just a consensus discussion, we're going to leave them up through Pride Month as a celebration with the community. I happen to serve an open and affirming parish, and a gentleman who said, he was very upset that these flags were out there, and I don't want to know. I don't have a problem with gay people. Which, by the way, if you have to tell me 3 times in the course of a 5-minute conversation that I don't have a problem with gay people, that tells me that yes, you do have a problem with gay people, and your problem is called homophobia, and it is your problem, not theirs. Um, but I don't have a problem with gay people. I just don't want to know. I don't want to know what goes on in anybody's bedroom. And I said, "Okay, so what you're saying is if you don't want to know if the person next to you in the pew is gay, is that they don't get to do what you do every single Sunday." And he looked at me and said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, every single Sunday you walk into this building holding hands with your wife of 50 plus years, and you sit down in a pew next to her through worship, and when you leave, you walk out holding her hand. If the person next to you happens to be gay and their spouse is of the same gender or of the same gender presentation as yours, you don't want to see them holding hands because you don't want to know. But it's okay that everybody knows that you are cis het. And he just sort of looked at me like, oh, I don't think I changed his mind because I don't think he was at a point of rational discussion when we were having this conversation. He was mostly just pissed off. But, hopefully he at least got something to think about there because, again, for cis het people to say, well, why do they have to throw it in our face? They're not throwing it in your face. You're just noticing because it's different. And, I'll tell you right now, cis het people throw their sexuality and their relationships in my face way more than LGBTQ people do. And people just don't even notice it because it's quote unquote normative.
And part of that is because it's still not safe to be LGBTQ, alphabet mafia, however you want to phrase that, the community. It's still not safe to be us in a lot of places. And even in the places where it's reportedly safe, we still have to risk things like I've got pride stickers on my car because that's what I do. I make stickers in addition to teach. And around a certain election, I got followed into a parking lot and screamed at. Why did I have to throw it in their face? Among other things. And it's like, why do you have to have the Confederate flag on your car? Like, I'm choosing to show that I love people. You're choosing to show a little bit of bigotry with your, driving habits.
Right. And, if you are following somebody into a parking lot to roll down your window and scream at them,
I'm not the problem.
you're not the one. Right. The person being screamed at is not the one throwing things in people's face at that point.
Yeah. And that was here in Western Mass.
Mhm.
I've had similar things happen in Virginia and Iowa. Though the best one in Iowa was actually when someone was excited to see the flags on the back of my car and the pride stickers on the back of my car. And I've talked about that one before where I'm in a parking lot for a fast food joint and all of a sudden I just start hearing people scream, "Gay! Gay!" But it's like muffled a little bit through the car windows and the conversation I was having, but I was absolutely terrified. And then all of a sudden someone's running up to the window. "Oh my god, I really love your pride stickers." And running away. And it was one of the weirdest interactions.
And meanwhile, you're saying, my God, you scared the shit out of me.
I mean, yeah, I was. But it's also part of why I do what I do. It's why I have those stickers. It's why I'm open and out about who I am as a queer person, as a non-binary person. So as I'm teaching trans studies, for example, I've had many students tell me when I teach trans studies or LGBT studies, it makes a difference to me that I'm learning about my community from somebody in my community. I'm visible because there are people who aren't safe to be yet.
Right.
I'm visible because I want my students and other people to know queer people make it to adulthood. Queer people achieve things they were told they would never would. One of my affirmation stickers is like, I can do more than unbelievers said I'd never do.
Mhm.
Like, there's many people who said it I mean, quite frankly, we're having a conversation about visibility here. I was taught at one point it was better to be dead than to be gay. Not by my family, but by a religious community that was less of a church and more of a four-letter word. And there are still people being taught that. And for me, what helped me get through what I had been taught was seeing queer adults, queer and trans adults who were also Christian because of where I'd been taught that message. And seeing those folks gave me hope of, like, they're living these fruitful, fulfilled lives from what I'm seeing as an outsider. I obviously am not wasn't living their lives, but I saw fruitful, fulfilled lives, and it helped me want to believe something other than it was better to be dead than to be gay, or that I needed to pray away the gay, which you can't do. If you are watching this and you did not know that, you cannot pray away the gay.
Yep. Guaranteed.
And
You
it,
can pray the hate away, but you cannot pray the gay away.
yeah, yeah, that's Bob's been on that one for a couple days now, and we're thinking we need merch. Let us know in the comments.
That's one of my themes every year during Pride is, because again, this is not my month. This is not the month for me to be centering my voice, but I do like keep an eye on my social media for, the phobes, um, the bigots coming out to, just piss all over other people's parades. And, if you do that and you happen to do it where I can see it, I'm going to make you cry. And, not in a good way. And so typically what I do in those instances is I invite those people to, pray away their bigotry.
Yep, can confirm he does do this. And he may not make them cry in a good way, but he'll also then post a video on social media that reminds queer people how much they're loved and how important we are. That may make the queer people cry in a good way. Not saying Bob's videos have made me cry or anything, because I wouldn't do that. That's sarcasm, folks. Just a cue for the other autistics in the room, that was entirely sarcasm. So, it's not just queerness that people say they don't see. We started this with colorblind racism, and we need to recognize that you may wanna believe you don't see race, but race sees you, and you're benefiting from, like, if you are white, you are benefiting from white privilege. If you are straight, you're benefiting from straight privilege or cis privilege, etc. And I think the other thing I want to talk about, because in our first couple episodes, we've already had someone reach out and say, hey, it's important to me that I saw the disability part in your videos or in your podcast so far. And so part of what I want to talk about, like, I'm visibly I'm not always visibly disabled. I have a dynamic disability. At least my physical disability is dynamic, meaning there are days where I'm doing well and I don't need my mobility aids. And there are days where I'm not going anywhere without them. There are also days where I'm not getting out of bed. There's a reason why most of my dissertation was written from bed. But it got to a point where I now have a sticker slash magnet that says, I know I don't look this disabled. This may surprise you. Most of my body is on the inside where you cannot see it. If you're not, there's two ways to look at this blind-ism thing. And part of it is you can't always see what you think you're seeing. Like, you can't always see the identity that people would claim. So you can't see that I'm disabled all the time. But today I needed a Mark cart because I was so physically fatigued, I couldn't get through the store without one. But I'm always cautious when I go to use that Mark cart because I've been harassed for being a fat person using a Mark cart, which sounds absurd when you think about it retrospectively, but it happens.
Mhm.
Or you don't need that disabled spot. That can't be your placard. In Massachusetts, they make you put your picture on the placard. So, I mean, if you wanted to, you could say like, really? Um, got the doctor's note to prove it. But what where I'm going with this is regardless of if you see an identity, doesn't mean it's not real. Regardless of if someone believes it's real, doesn't mean it's not real. Um, and I'm going to send this message out specifically to folks who struggle with whether it be queer identities or like people are like, why are there so many autistics and ADHDers now? Like there used to not be this many. No, we were always here. It's just our ability to get diagnosed changed drastically as social stigmas and social determinants of health were challenged,
Yeah.
right?
I was diagnosable from at least 1986, and I got diagnosed in 2023.
Think we got diagnosed the same year.
Go figure.
Um, yeah, I was diagnosed at 29 years old.
Yeah, I was 48.
Yeah, yep. Um, and that doesn't mean we weren't like autism isn't something you get. It's something you are. ADHD, not something you get. It's a neurodivergence. Your neural pathways are different. And regardless of if you see it, doesn't mean it's not there. Especially as an adult who's getting diagnosed, something that um people within the disability community might tell you is if you know this to be true about yourself and the first doctor you go to doesn't see it, that doesn't mean it's not true because our symptoms are dynamic. They change between times of day, they change between our mental and emotional circumstances, our physical circumstances. They just change. One of the clinchers for my autism diagnosis was actually me covering my ears because the fire trucks were going by and I couldn't handle the sound. Turns out that's not what allistic people do. I mean, there's a host of factors, but yeah, apparently non-autistics don't necessarily have that response as often. What you have thoughts?
I just always thought I had super sensitive hearing.
Sensory processing disorder is part of it, but also it's the same way that we hear the lights and the electricity, and that fly buzzing is driving me insane. Like, it really is. I don't know where it is. And y'all can't hear it because it's not gonna sound on the thing, but there is a fly in the room. It's rude.
Yeah, there has not been a moment since we started recording that I have not been aware of the air moving through the vents in this room. Anybody else in my household walking into this room wouldn't even hear it.
So, I've referenced Nathan Seelove's play Aught is Love, and if you haven't checked it out, again, I highly recommend. But he also has a series from when he was younger. I don't think he makes new episodes anymore. You might be autistic if. And all things submitted by autistics.
Mhm.
And I'm just saying, friend.
Well, I mean, that's how we got to my ADHD diagnosis was my wife saying, "Have you ever been screened for ADHD?" And I said, "Why no? Why do you ask?"
Oh, honey.
Yeah. Hmm.
Could have told you that on our first couple lives.
When I finally did get a doctor to screen me instead of just blowing me off and saying, oh, well, you're an adult and you have a master's degree. You can't have ADHD. Literally had a psychiatrist say that to me. When I finally actually got a psychologist to just do the screening, not the testing, the screening, he's like, yeah, there's 13 questions on the screening and you answered yes to 12 of them. Here's a card for a colleague of mine. Go see him. He's the local expert and he'll be able to tell you one way or the other for sure. I went and saw that guy and he did the testing. And when we got together for the big reveal, as I like to call it, he said, normally when I'm doing these, I say things like indicates or tends towards. I'm not going to mince any words with you. You got it, man. You got it all. Like, thanks a lot.
Yeah. When I first asked, actually, rewind. My therapist in my PhD program was like, I think we need to get you tested for ADHD, friend. And I'm sitting there going, can we by any chance add the autism to that? And she goes, why would we do that? I'm like, here's a spreadsheet. And she goes, okay, yeah. Not just because I handed a spreadsheet, but because of the evidence within the spreadsheet.
But
Still,
also
she's like,
because
how
you
could there
need
be a
evidence
spreadsheet?
spreadsheet. Right. Can we look back for a second? Just I think maybe we have not really addressed, and I because I know that there are people who are not part of the community or who, are just they're coming to this from the outside, right? And so that term privilege, um, I know for a lot of people that like raises their hackles, right? The minute they hear somebody say that they have privilege. And oftentimes it's a socioeconomic thing. They're like, I grew up in a poor working class family. How dare you say I'm privileged? Blah, blah. That's not the kind of privilege we're talking about here. Although socioeconomic privilege is a thing, but privilege is the way that I describe it for people is any obstacle that people around you have had to deal with that you didn't through, something that you had no control over. So, for instance, I am white, which means I have never had to deal with racism. And if you're listening to this and you're about to say, well, what about reverse racism? That's not a thing. Sit down, shut up, and listen. I'm I'm male. I've never had to deal with sexism. Okay. I'm cis het, which means I've never had to deal with cis sexism or trans sexism, right? I've never been on the receiving end of those kinds of prejudice. And I've never had to like find ways to navigate those and work around those, which means, for instance, I don't have to think twice about taking my spouse's hand as we're walking through the grocery store. And it doesn't matter what community we're in, I don't have to think twice about whether or not that's a safe thing to do. You know, I've never had somebody tell me that I better not be seen in that neighborhood after dark or I'm going to get my ass beat because I happen to be the wrong color. I have people of color who are friends of mine who've had that experience. That's all we're talking about. When we talk about privilege, we're talking about the systemic effects of prejudice and bigotry, whether it's cissexism, heterosexism, ableism, sexism, white supremacy, whatever, the systemic effects of that you haven't had to deal with, that's your privilege.
Yeah.
And the thing about privilege is nobody asked for it, right? That by definition, our privilege is stuff that we didn't ask for. It's stuff that just happened because of, our genetics or where we were born or, our non-matching chromosomes, whatever. The point isn't that we asked for it or that we even want it or like it. It's that whether we like it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not, we do benefit from it. Or maybe put a different way, our neighbors who don't share it suffer from their lack of it, right?
Yeah.
My Black neighbor has things that he has to deal with that I don't because he's Black and I'm not. My wife deals with things as a pastor in the church that I never have to deal with because I'm male and she's female. That's all we're talking about. And it's not that it's something you asked for or even something that you want. It's just a reality. And so I say all of that so that hopefully, if there are folks out there who are struggling with that concept of privilege, hopefully understanding it a little bit more, unfolding a little bit more what we mean when we say privilege can help some folks realize to say that you have privilege is not a moral judgment about you as a person. If you trade on that privilege and you are not using that privilege to benefit people who don't have it, now I'm starting to maybe think about making some moral judgments of you. But just the fact that you have privilege is not, that's a morally neutral fact.
Yeah. And another way to articulate privilege isn't just it's something you don't have to think about. So, like, I don't have to think about my race. I'm white. I should think about my race because I have privilege.
Right.
But it's also, you gave the examples of like, I grew up in a working class household and like we worked really hard for everything we have. I don't have privilege. No, it's things like white privilege, for example. Um, my whiteness is not what's making my life harder.
Mhm.
So if you are cisgender or straight, your cisgender identity or your straight identity aren't making your life harder, or rather, systemic oppression based off of those things is not
Right.
what's making your life harder. So if you are cisgender and a person of color, racism, you don't have racial privilege, that's making your life harder. But you're cisgender or straight, those things are privileges in the society that we are in. So those things would not be making your life harder. You don't have to think about them if you don't want to.
Mhm.
Whereas as a queer person, as a non-binary person, I have to analyze the situations that I'm going into based off of my gender, based off of my orientation or romantic identities. Whereas
Safety.
my whiteness, I don't have to think about it. If I don't want to, I can say, I don't feel like thinking about my whiteness today.
Mhm.
But if I choose not to think about my whiteness, I need to think about why I'm not doing so.
Mhm.
Um, I'm going to move us into put it into practice. For today's put it into practice, we'd like you to consider your experience with blind-isms. Have you offered them? Have you been like, I don't see color, I don't see gender, I just see the person? Have you been on the receiving end? Have you dealt with both sides of that? Respond in the comments what it might mean to see someone for who they are and share what you feel that adds to building affirming communities. You can also choose to make a video with your response to what it means to see people for the identities they claim in order to affirm them. And when you post those videos on social media, feel free to tag us and we'll respond.
Absolutely.
If the second part, as always, is if you have questions, feel free to leave those in the comments or at the Google form linked in the description. Today's episode is one of those, it's kind of one of those topics that people definitely like to avoid. Like, they don't want to talk about privilege. They don't want to talk about what they choose not to see. But we need to talk about those things in order to build affirming communities. And we need to think through how our identities play a role in how we engage with the world in order to build affirming communities. Um, do you have anything you want to add before we wrap up this episode?
No, other than to remind people who are listening that they are indeed deeply and profoundly loved, and that I hope everybody listening to this, whether they are part of the LGBTQIA plus community or not, has a wonderful and blessed and joyous Pride Month, and that they are surrounded by unbridled queer joy today and every day.
I love that. Y'all take care of yourselves. Remember, you are important. You matter. You make a difference. And you're too important not to take care of yourselves. We will see you next time on the Affirming Practice Podcast. Remember to comment, share, follow, all of the things so that you get notified when we post next. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Can you pause the recording for a moment?